everyone, good evening. I am Gushin Galan and you're watching Vantage. Our lead story tonight is from China. Chinese manufacturers have begun what experts call a silent blockade on India. There are no formal export curbs, but in reality, supplies of fertilizers and rare earth magnets are being restricted. What are the implications for India? And what does this mean for the reset of India-China ties? We'll break it down. In Pakistan, Field Marshal Asim Munir is back in the spotlight once again for his anti-India rhetoric and bluster on Kashmir. In China, another round of purge is underway in the military. We'll look at what that means for the PLA's combat readiness. In West Asia, is Netanyahu ready to end the war in Gaza? We'll bring you the latest from the region. Also, what is Sam Altman planning next at OpenAI as the AI giant faces challenges from competitors? In Sri Lanka, India has scored a big win. We tell you what it means. We'll discuss all that and more coming up, but first, the headlines. US President Donald Trump says he is not offering Iran anything. Neither is he talking to them. Trump reiterates that the US strikes have totally obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. This comes as Tehran says talks with Washington cannot resume unless the US rules out further strikes on Iran. Israel eyes striking peace agreements with neighboring Lebanon and Syria. It is a potentially historic shift in the region. Control of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights remains a contentious issue between Israel and Syria. But the Netanyahu government says it is interested in expanding the Abraham Accords, which Israel signed with the UAE, Bahrain and Morocco in 2020. Bangladesh opens the murder trial of a key student protester. His killing last July escalated demonstrations nationwide. The protest ultimately ousted the then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Abu Saeed was the first student demonstrator to be killed in the police crackdown. 30 people have been charged in connection with his death. In India, police say the alleged rape of a law school student in Kolkata was premeditated. Authorities say 3 of the 4 men arrested planned the crime in advance. The police say the prime accused is also a serial offender. He has at least 5 cases registered against him. This includes attempt to murder, sexual assault and extortion. And militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party will disarm in early July. That's according to local media reports. This comes just a week after the PKK announced it was ending its decades-long armed conflict with Turkey. Kurds make up about 20% of Turkey's population of 85 million. Relations between India and China were supposed to be improving. Both sides agreed on a border deal last year. It is aimed at resetting the freight ties. Since then, we have seen some positive changes, like some bilateral visits, more strategic meetings, and de-escalation at the border. Despite this, one area remains troubled, and that is trade. China appears to have imposed a silent blockade on India. Now on paper, there are no curbs on selling to India. But in practice, it's very different. Beijing is choking the sales of fertilizers to India. There's no official ban in place. Instead, Beijing is using other indirect means. For instance, every shipment is supposed to be inspected before being exported. If you don't inspect, you cannot export. Hence the term silent blockade. Reports say this has been happening for 2 months. And Indian firms are rightly worried. We buy around 160,000 tons of fertilizers from June to December. Around 80% of this comes from China. And needless to say, this is a crucial import item. As a country of 1.4 billion people, food isn't just an industry for India. It is a matter of national priority. We use fertilizers to boost our farming output. If there is a shortage, this output could suffer. In the long run, maybe India can plug this shortage. But in the short run, there is very little India can do. and China knows this. An official blockade would be hard to defend. Instead, Beijing has opted for this silent method, basically using procedures and protocols to delay and deny shipments. And it is not just fertilizers. China imposed similar curbs on rare earth magnets too. Now, rare earth are a group of 17 elements. They are used in a host of things, from fighter jets to phones to cars. And China makes up 90% of rare earth processing. So any blockade would trigger a shortage. The question is, why is China doing this? Aren't we in the middle of a reset? In theory, yes. Last week, India's defense minister traveled to China. It was the first ministerial trip since 2020. In China, Rajnath Singh met his counterpart. He called for a permanent solution to the border crisis. In fact, he also spoke about avoiding new complexities. And China has always been keen on this reset. We saw that after Donald Trump unleashed his tariff war. President Xi wrote to Indian President Draupadi Murmu. He called for a dragon-elephant tango. Even in the past, Beijing has called for normalizing the ties. Then what explains the silent blockade? Well, there are two possible reasons. Number one, it's a negotiating tactic. We are in the middle of talks to reset this relationship, so China is flaunting its leverage. It is exposing India's dependence on Chinese imports. Why? To get favorable results, like a removal on the ban on Chinese technologies, or easier, clearance from Chinese investments. That's the first possible reason. Or number two, the Chinese feel confident. Initially, they wanted India's help against the United States. Xi wanted to jointly take on Donald Trump's tariffs. But that equation has changed recently. India's ties with Trump have soured, all thanks to President's mediation rants. Plus, China is making progress on signing a deal with Trump. At first, the tariffs seemed lethal, but now they look manageable. Perhaps that explains China's aggressive trade strategy. Whatever the motive, New Delhi must take note. China is our largest trading partner. Bilateral trade is higher than $130 billion. A lot of that includes strategically important items, like fertilizers and rare earths. And just to be clear, this problem isn't limited to India. Most of the world depends on China for such products. The difference is A, we share a border, and B, we have 1.4 billion people. So how should India handle this problem? The first solution is to build homegrown alternatives. On rare earths, we are seeing that. New Delhi is preparing a project to boost rare earths output. Some 5,000 crores are being allocated for it. The priority is to find other vulnerable sectors and invest in them. That's the first solution. The second is to diversify. We can try to source and sell goods elsewhere, like in the US or Europe. With the US, India is trying to strike a trade deal. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar will be in the US this week. He will also attend a Quad meeting of ministers. And chances are China will be discussed. This silent blockade is a reality check for India's China policy. Yes, diplomacy must be given priority. Yes, a reset is important. But don't forget who you are dealing with. Asim Munir is back to doing what he does best. Not marshalling his troops, not organizing his country's defense, but speaking from a podium. That's what Pakistani army chiefs are famous for. Not strategy, but speeches. And Asim Munir gave a new one on Saturday. He addressed a passing out parade at the Naval Academy. As always, it had two ingredients: fake bluster on Kashmir and raging anti-India hate. First, listen to what he said.
We stand firm with the Kashmiri people for their right of self-determination. What India tends to term as terrorism is in fact the legitimate struggle. The onus of ensuing escalation, one that may ultimately bear catastrophic consequences for the entire region, will squarely lie with the aggressor.
At home, this is like a victory lap for Munir. Despite being routed, Pakistan claims they won against India. Afterwards, Munir also visited the US. He had a private lunch with Donald Trump at the White House. So in Munir's mind, this is a victory speech. And the content is vaguely familiar. Because back in April, Munir gave a similar speech in Islamabad. He called Kashmir Pakistan's jugular vein. He also promised all support to terror groups in Kashmir. And days later, the Pahalgam attack happened. We all know what happened next. India launched Operation Sindoor in May. Our military struck Pakistani terror camps and military installations. But despite that bloody nose, Munir's rhetoric hasn't stopped. He is defending the terrorists. In fact, Asim Munir says they are not terrorists at all. He claims it's a legitimate struggle for self-determination. Needless to say, this is not true. Kashmir is an integral part of India. It is not some global cause for Pakistan to champion. But if Munir insists on championing something, we have a suggestion. A real case for self-determination, not in Kashmir, in Balochistan. This is the biggest province in Pakistan. It makes up 44% of the country's land area. Also, it's rich in resources. Balochistan has oil, gas and precious metals like gold. Yet its people live in poverty. Why? Because of Islamabad's policy making. Balochistan is a key part of China's investments in Pakistan. Multiple CPEC projects are in this province. CPEC, as you know, is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But these investments are not helping the locals. It is only helping the generals in China. Ethnic Balochs have protested against this injustice, but the army has responded with violence. And as we speak, one such protest is underway in the province. Dozens of Balochs have organized a sit-in protest, and today marks the 5th day of the demonstration. But you won't see Asim Munir talk about that. Just think about the absurdity. Pakistan cannot even handle its largest province. Insurgents are mounting weekly attacks, yet Munir talks about India. Forget helping so-called fighters in Kashmir. Pakistan's army chief can barely hold his country together. The fact is, people can see through all this. They have seen the destruction caused to Pakistan's terror camps. They have seen the hits on Pakistani air bases. No lunch with Trump will solve that, and neither will the rants to rookie soldiers. Now let's talk about China and its military. Another wave of sackings have hit the PLA. More high-ranking officials have been pushed out. And the latest official to fall is Vice Admiral Li Hanjun. He served in the Chinese Navy as the Chief of Staff. But why was Admiral Li removed? China has not given a clear answer. In fact, the statement announcing Admiral Li's exit is brief and ambiguous. I have a quote. Listen to this. The Navy Servicemen's Congress decided to dismiss Li Hanjun from his position as a representative of the 14th National People's Congress. This is typical of China's approach. Even the language is deliberately vague. It follows an old pattern. There is no mention of what went wrong, no details about his conduct, no charges have been disclosed. In fact, whenever China removes officials this way, it usually signals the officer was corrupt. And Admiral Li isn't the only one to be purged. Liu Shipeng, a deputy chief engineer, has also been sacked. Liu worked for China's State Nuclear Cooperation, and he was expelled along with Admiral Li. Their removals are part of a wider campaign, a systematic purge within China's military and defense establishment. It is all happening under Chinese President Xi Jinping's watch. Last week, Beijing confirmed another high-profile exit. Miao Hua was dismissed. Miao was a top-level military official. He was an admiral in the Chinese Navy. His last assignment was at the CMC. Now CMC stands for Central Military Commission. It is China's top decision-making body in military matters. CMC is also one of the most powerful institutions in China. It is headed by Xi Jinping himself, and Miao served on the CMC as a director. He was in charge of political work across the military. His role included personnel promotions and ideological enforcement within the ranks. In other words, he kept the military aligned with party thinking. So Miao's ouster is a significant step, but it hardly comes as a surprise. The action against Miao follows a familiar pattern. His predecessor was also purged. So were the two previous defense ministers of China. And they gave the same reason for all the exits: violations of discipline. It's a phrase that China uses often with these exits. It usually means corruption. But these exits are significant for another reason. Xi is making an example of his own appointees. All these officials who were removed recently, they were handpicked by the Chinese president. And by removing them, Xi Jinping is sending a message. He wants to show no one is above the party, and the Chinese president himself. Xi wants a PLA that is loyal, efficient, and combat ready. He has been investing heavily in military upgrades. But that's just one part of the equation. Command and control is another. This is where Xi Jinping sees a problem, because corruption runs deep in the PLA, and Xi Jinping is unable to trust the top brass. That's why he is removing so many officials and restructuring the Chinese military. The aim is to prepare the PLA for a new era of conflict, one shaped by AI cyber warfare and drone systems. So in this strategy, loyalty is non-negotiable. And for Xi Jinping, a corruption-free PLA is a battle-ready PLA. Any instability caused by these purges is worth the risk for Xi Jinping. But this strategy can have negative consequences too, because the growing purges signal instability within the PLA's ranks and serious misjudgment at the top. This can hurt the Chinese military in the long run. It could hollow out the Chinese military. It even signals to outside world that China's military command is in flux and far from battle ready. Xi Jinping wants the PLA to be war ready by 2027. But with these ongoing purges, that target looks increasingly out of reach. For months, Benjamin Netanyahu has had one war goal: a complete victory over Hamas. But now suddenly the Israeli Prime Minister is talking about hostages. For the first time, he is publicly prioritizing the return of the hostages still in Gaza. This comes as the Israeli public has grown weary of an endless war. They want an immediate return of hostages. So what does this mean? Is Netanyahu finally responding to growing domestic pressure? Is this a prelude to a ceasefire, or is this a way to buy time from a frustrated nation? Our next report tells you.
For nearly 20 months, the war in Gaza has been a drumbeat of devastation. Airstrikes, evacuations, ceasefire talks that begin and collapse like sandcastles. And through it all, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stood firm on one message: a total victory over Hamas. But this weekend, the Israeli Prime Minister has suddenly changed his tune. He is talking about bringing back hostages again.
I want to inform you that many opportunities have now opened up, as you surely know, following this victory. First and foremost, to rescue the hostages.
More than 50 of them still trapped in Gaza since Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack. For months, they were mentioned only as tragic footnotes in a broader Israeli war doctrine. Now, suddenly, Netanyahu wants to shift the narrative. He says that many opportunities have opened up following Israel's war with Iran. And now rescuing the hostages might just come first. Or at least that saying so might be politically necessary. So what has changed? The brief 12-day war gave Netanyahu a breather. Polls briefly ticked up. The public was in support of Netanyahu's military actions. But it didn't last. By last weekend, headlines had shifted back to Gaza. Over 56,000 Palestinians have been killed and neighborhoods flattened. Yet the hostages haven't still returned home. What's more, the domestic tide was turning. In Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, thousands were back on the streets demanding a ceasefire deal. Demanding that Netanyahu bring their families home. Then came Trump, always eager to play both matchmaker and kingmaker. The US president is demanding a Gaza deal on Truth Social. After all, Trump has just handed Netanyahu a gift with the Iran strikes. Also, there is his vocal support for dismissing Netanyahu's corruption trial as a witch hunt. So the Israeli PM has no option but to listen. Behind closed doors, high-level meetings have begun again. Netanyahu has been meeting with key ministers to reassess Israel's Gaza strategy. Ron Dermer, his trusted advisor, flew to Washington to hash out the new proposal. It talks about a 60-day ceasefire, the release of 10 living hostages and 18 bodies, and a framework for ending the war. But a release of hostages demands diplomacy and compromise, even if that means negotiating with Hamas. And this reflects the divide at the heart of Israeli society. One side wants closure, the other wants victory. Netanyahu is now being asked to choose. Right now, his base is split over this decision. His rivals, like former PM Naftali Bennett, are sharpening their knives. Some are calling openly for Netanyahu to resign. And the longer the war drags on, the more the domestic chorus in Israel grows. Over half of Israelis now say Netanyahu should step down. Nearly two-thirds say the war in Gaza should end. So Benjamin Netanyahu stands at a crossroads. The Iran strikes gave him a temporary high, but the reality of Gaza has returned like a shadow. Right now, he has a chance to bring the hostages home and cement his legacy. But legacy, like rescue, depends on what you're willing to risk and whom you're willing to lose.
Is your computer good enough for an AI world? Well, Sam Altman says no. In a recent podcast, the OpenAI CEO said that the current computers were designed for a world without AI. Basically, as AI evolves, the computers we use will become outdated. Now, this is quite a sudden statement from Altman. This is a man who has insisted for years that only softwares need update. Basically meaning your algorithms, models, data, only they need to change. But now he is suggesting a change of the entire foundation. He wants to rebuild the computer. But is this an ideological U-turn, or is a calculated sales pitch for the company? Let's look at it. To understand Altman's pivot, here's something you must know. Generative AI always needs more. I am talking about more compute power, more memory, more bandwidth. That means the current hardware is always reeling under pressure. But that kind of processing doesn't need faster chips. It even demands a new kind of system. So Altman is now claiming that the days of our devices as primary AI interfaces is over. Instead, something new is coming. And apparently, it is coming from his own company, OpenAI. Back in 2023, OpenAI quietly acquired a startup helmed by Johnny Ive. This is a man who was behind the design of Apple's iPhone. At that time, many wondered why OpenAI had teamed with a hardware designer. And the answer is this. Reports suggest they are working a mystery AI hardware project. Maybe the next computer to handle AI. The design is still work in progress, but of course, the timing is crucial here. OpenAI is facing enormous pressure from inside and out. Internally, the company is grappling with compute shortages. It is so severe that they have even delayed product rollouts. They don't have enough computing power or custom chips. And externally, the competition is sharpening its knives. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has launched a talent raid. He has lured away 4 senior OpenAI researchers, and he is offering 9-figure bonuses. So OpenAI's leadership scrambled to reassure its staff. They describe the feeling as if someone broke into our home. The top leadership is now issuing emotional Slack messages, even promising better compensation packages. Meanwhile, the pressure is growing. OpenAI employees are reportedly working 80 hours a week. The company had to enforce a mandatory week off to just prevent burnout. And then there's the looming financial reality. Running ChatGPT reportedly costs $700,000 per day. Altman has acknowledged the company is bleeding money. They do not have millions in investments, but the financial pressure is slowly building. And finally, there is AI fatigue. OpenAI's latest products haven't dazzled. The Sora text-to-video model stumbled on release, leading some to question whether OpenAI is still innovating. So Sam Altman knows the tide is turning. The AI glitz is wearing off. So now he is making a pivot to new AI machines. Now we don't know what it will look like. OpenAI can go the Apple way, making this device a part of a bigger ecosystem like iPhone and iOS. Some reports, in fact, suggest it won't be a wearable. Sam Altman has, however, hinted that it is meant to fit in your pocket. But whatever the new device looks like, Altman's gamble comes with enormous risk. Rebuilding the computer is not just expensive, it's existential. But if he pulls it off, he will be the guy who gave us the next computer. And if history is any lesson, from Microsoft's Windows to Apple's iPhone, the one who owns the platform owns the future. India has scored a win in Sri Lanka. We have seen creeping Chinese influence in the island, especially on its maritime assets. But New Delhi is fighting back. It is bailing out the Colombo dockyard. Now this dockyard is Sri Lanka's leading shipbuilding and repair site. But recently it's been saddled with debt. How much? Around $93 million. A Japanese company owned the majority stake in this dockyard. They had 51% of the ownership. So first the officials reached out to the Japanese government for a bailout. No luck. Then they reached out to Sri Lanka's government. Again, no luck. And that's when Colombo sought out New Delhi. India saw an opportunity in this deal. Reports say multiple companies expressed interest, but eventually the deal went to MDL. That's Mazagaon Dock Shipbuilders Limited. It is a state-run company that makes ships in Mumbai. MDL is buying controlling stake in the Colombo dockyard. For how much? Almost $53 million. The money isn't that consequential for MDL. The company is worth around $15 billion. It has an annual turnover of more than $1 billion. So the money isn't significant. What's significant is the strategic importance. Until now, MDL was a trusted shipbuilder for India, for the domestic market. But this marks MDL's first foreign venture. It could be the stepping stone towards something bigger, perhaps cutting into the global market. And it shows in the Dalal Street. MDL shares were up by 2.3% in trading today. But we'll keep the finances out of it. Instead, let's look at the strategy behind this deal. First, location. Colombo is a key maritime hub, and the dockyard is Sri Lanka's prized asset. It doesn't just serve ships in the country, it has clients across Asia and Africa. By bailing it out, India has hit two birds with one stone. First, gaining the Sri Lankan government's goodwill. If the dockyard defaulted, it would have caused a serious spillover. 16% of the dockyard is owned by the Employees' Provident Fund. 9% is owned by Sri Lanka's Insurance Fund and 5% by the Ports Authority. Imagine if such an asset had defaulted, even ordinary Sri Lankans would have been affected. So India was right to help out. I am sure Colombo will appreciate the move. Secondly, it is also a challenge to China. Beijing has significant stake in Sri Lanka's maritime assets. It is building a port and city in Colombo. It has a 99-year lease on the Hambantota port. Many experts see Sri Lanka as part of China's plan to box India in, which is why this deal is crucial. MDL says it has gained a strategic foothold in the region. So in all, it's a good deal for both sides. And for India, it's a welcome sign. Previous Sri Lankan governments relied heavily on Chinese debt. That's what landed them in a debt trap. But this time, Colombo reached out to India, and that will give New Delhi confidence. It aligns with what we have seen from Sri Lanka's President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, or AKD. He has promised to keep India's interests in mind. He has also vowed to never allow anti-India activities on Lankan soil. In that context, this deal is crucial. It shows that India is keen to engage with Colombo to help out wherever possible. Now let's shift our attention to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russia has just carried out its biggest airstrike on Ukraine since the war began. Over 500 aerial weapons were fired during the weekend. Ukraine says the attack targeted regions far from the front line. And it shows Moscow's intent to escalate, not negotiate. This comes after the Russian president suggested peace talks in Istanbul. Vladimir Putin now admits no progress has been made. Where does that leave Ukraine now? And what happens to Donald Trump's mediation? So far, the US president's interventions have failed to stop the fighting on the ground. Here's a report.
It is the biggest airstrike that Ukraine has suffered since the war began. Russia fired more than 500 aerial weapons in one night. The barrage included 477 drones, decoys, and 60 missiles. Ukrainian defenses intercepted most of them, but the scale of the assault was unprecedented. The attack targeted regions far from the front line. This includes western Ukraine. Moscow claimed it struck military-industrial sites and oil refineries. Ukraine confirmed the loss of a Western-supplied F-16 jet. The Ukrainian Air Force said the pilot shot down 7 air targets. His jet was damaged during the final strike. He could not eject. He was killed in action. In just 1 week, Russia has used more than 1,270 drones, over 1,100 glide bombs, and 114 missiles on Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a strong statement after the Russian strikes. He said, Moscow wants to escalate the war, and not end it. On the other side, Moscow is sending mixed signals. Just days ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin called for new peace talks. Putin said, Moscow was ready to return to negotiations.
We are ready to hold such a meeting in Istanbul. As for when exactly, the heads of the negotiating teams on both sides, and they, by the way, are regularly in touch, call each other all the time, and in my opinion this is not bad already, are now discussing the time for another meeting. Well, what will be the subject? The subject, in my opinion, should be the discussion of memoranda of both sides.
But over the weekend, his position changed. Putin was sounding less optimistic. He admitted the talks remain stalled, and the positions of both sides are absolutely contradictory. Putin gave no indication of compromise, nor any details on a new ceasefire plan, and no clarity on territorial claims. This puts U.S. President Donald Trump in a bind. Soon after taking office, he prioritized ending the war in Ukraine and pushed Ukraine to begin talks with Russia for a ceasefire. Until last week, Trump was hopeful for a breakthrough.
You know, we talk about Russia, and we're working that one. President Putin called up and he said, I'd love to help you with Iran. I said, do me a favor. I'll handle Iran. Help me with Russia. We got to get that one settled. And I think something's going to happen there. But we did some great work.
So far, there are no signs of a truce in the war. The conflict is escalating, and peace continues to elude Ukraine.
South Africa's experiment with coalition politics is already showing serious strain. And this week, it nearly snapped. The African National Congress, or ANC, and the Democratic Alliance, or DA, joined hands in 2024. But this week, they clashed over the firing of a minister. The ANC fired a deputy DA minister over an unauthorized trip. The DA hit back by walking out of President Ramaphosa's key national dialogue initiatives. So is the government of national unity falling apart or just holding on by a thread? And what does this mean for South Africa? Our next report tells you.
South Africa's coalition government was already a delicate balancing act. But now, the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance coalition has swerved dangerously close to collapse. The DA dramatically walked out of President Cyril Ramaphosa's flagship National Dialogue Initiative. The initiative set out to tackle South Africa's most pressing challenges, from soaring unemployment to rampant crime. Their reason? The president sacked a DA Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield over an unauthorized trip to the U.S. That firing set off a firestorm. The second largest party in the country accused Ramaphosa of double standards. It issued an ultimatum to remove allegedly corrupt ANC ministers within 48 hours. It looked like the beginning of the end. And yet, just as things looked set to combust, the DA pulled back. They're staying in the government, at least for now. So, the coalition government is still intact. But it's like duct taping a cracked dam. The DA may not be leaving the coalition, but they are boycotting the national dialogue and threatening to block budget approvals. Basically, the coalition is hanging together by tension and not much else. The unity, part of the government of national unity, is looking increasingly aspirational. So what is the root of this clash? Well, it's partly ideological, partly personal, and mostly political. The ANC and DA were always strange bedfellows. The ANC, historically the Liberation Party of Nelson Mandela, embraces redistributive policies like land reform. The DA, seen by many as a business-friendly liberal party, supports free market economics and individual rights. They joined hands out of necessity because no party won a majority in 2024, but ideological differences have repeatedly boiled over. This latest spat over the firing of DA Deputy Minister is only the tip of the iceberg. The real clash is about trust, and there's very little of it. So, did Ramaphosa overplay his hand by firing the DA minister? That depends on whom you ask. The presidency insists the deputy DA minister violated protocol with his unapproved foreign trip. The DA is countering that with claims of Ramaphosa ignoring prior written requests and accuses him of applying the rules selectively. The deeper question is, was this about the trip or about power? Some analysts believe Ramaphosa was drawing a red line, testing how far the DA could be pushed. Others say it was a political miscalculation that nearly blew up the coalition. Ramaphosa even canceled a UN trip over fears the DA might walk away. But what does this mean for ordinary South Africans? The 2024 elections sparked some hope. Many believed a coalition could fix what a dominant party system had failed to. But there's only so much patience. The economy remains sluggish. Unemployment is stubbornly high. Electricity supply has improved, but most other problems haven't. So what happens next? South Africa is navigating uncharted territory. For 3 decades, the ANC ruled alone, and coalitions, by nature, are messy. They require compromise, trust, and restraint. Three things in short supply right now. And if the DA walks, the entire experiment in coalition governance could unravel. South Africa might then be looking at either a weak minority government or fresh elections.
Now let's shift our attention to Europe. The continent is enduring a relentless heat wave. Extreme heat has driven temperatures to record highs. For instance, Serbia has registered its highest ever temperature. And in Spain, temperatures have reached 46 degrees Celsius. This is a new June record for the country. From France to Portugal to Greece, there are heat alerts in several nations, and countries fear the threats of wildfires. So how are governments coping, and what's behind this sweltering heat? Our next report tells you.
In Italy's Rome, tourists are drinking from public fountains to stay cool. In Spain's Sevilla, workers are pushing carts with piles of ice bags. In the UK's London, people are fanning themselves and their loved ones. Such sights have become all too common. As a dangerous heat wave grips large swathes of Europe, locals and tourists are desperately trying to keep cool.
It's awful, it makes me collapse. We need to be looking for shade constantly. Air conditioning in the car, those who have it, and look, we have these bracelets that ring with all these heat warnings.
It's hot, we have to stay refreshed to avoid passing out. So we're drinking water to stay cool and to be able to withstand the summer heat because it's quite intense, above all in the city. So you have to stay hydrated.
It is only June, but across several European countries, temperatures are far above seasonal norms. In Spain, temperatures reached 46 degrees Celsius on Saturday. This is a new national record for June. The highest temperature previously recorded for the month was 45.2 degrees Celsius, which was logged in 1965. But Spain is not sweltering alone. Over the weekend, severe heat waves have been recorded in France, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. Across the Western Balkans, temperatures have crossed 40 degrees Celsius. Serbia registered its highest ever temperature since records began in the 19th century. Slovenia recorded its hottest ever June temperature on Saturday. Across these nations, there has been an uptick in heat stroke cases, and people are scrambling to cool down. So how are governments coping? Countries are on a high heat alert. Red heat warnings are in force in parts of Portugal, Italy, and Croatia. Amber warnings have been sounded in Spain, France, Austria, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, Serbia, Slovenia, Switzerland, and the UK. Portugal is on high alert for wildfires. So is Greece. Especially after a large wildfire broke out in Athens on Thursday. In Italy, outdoor work activities will soon be banned in many parts. Hospitals have opened up dedicated heat stroke pathways, with treatments like cold water immersion. Meanwhile, so-called climate shelters, with air conditioning and drinking water, have been set up across several countries. And authorities have issued health warnings. But the question is, why is this happening? 2 words: climate change. Human-caused climate change is supercharging disasters, not just in Europe, but globally. And as the planet has warmed, heat waves have grown stronger. They have become more frequent. And they are arriving much earlier than expected.
Look, it always gets super hot in Madrid. What surprises me is how early it's happening. We're still in June. July and August are usually horrible, but the fact that it's already like this now is surprising.
Hot weather kills about 500,000 people each year the world over. This death toll is greater than that from wars or terrorism. And if the world continues to heat up, deaths could more than quadruple by mid-century. After all, heat waves are silent killers. If climate action doesn't catch up, the health of our planet will continue to die a quiet death. But the impact will be loud and clear everywhere.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Wildfires spread across western Turkey as authorities struggle to control the blaze. Demonstrators stage a mock wedding in Venice to protest against the Bezos celebrations. And a Moscow cafe rides the Labubu popularity by turning pop art into Pop-Tart. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1936, Margaret Mitchell published her novel Gone with the Wind. It is a sweeping romance set during the US Civil War. But it largely ignored the brutal realities of slavery. It has since become one of the best-selling novels of all time. Leaving you on that note, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Что-то переключил?
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
stands at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion ka karj mo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese,
4 兆ドル以上も.
Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.